So I just, first of all, just wanted to turn to Davóne just to comment just a little bit and introduce his collaborators, which have been such a wonderful part of this creative process.
Hello, and thank you so much for joining us, yes, on this rainy evening. My name is Davóne Tines. I'm a singer and creator, and I'm so blessed to be joined by some really dear collaborators. Deshaun Gordon-King, who clearly plays the flute and is also a professor of music and healing practice at the Longy School of Music. And we have John Bitoy on the piano, who can play nearly anything, also a composer and improviser. Yeah.
So I was just thinking about the atmosphere in this room and the wonderful sense of connectivity and a kind of energy that was created, I think, amongst the audience and that we could sense among the performers, and also perhaps really radiating from each individual here. So these kind of just ripples or circles of connectivity and inspiration are something we just wanted to delve in a little bit to. I think at the core of that is we don't really get a sense there's a sort of monomaniacal ego that's projecting out and sort of pressing something onto us, but rather a sense of generosity at the core. So I just wanted to start, perhaps if you could discuss a little bit about just your sense of personal inspiration and grounding and kind of what really connects you with creativity and music individually, and then we'll talk about that as a group and then also as an entire audience.
Thank you. This program tonight is kind of a continual evolution of an idea that I've been working with for a few years now. The first iteration of it was my first recital for Carnegie Hall, Recital No. 1, Mass. And I went through a long creative process to decide what I wanted to do for that recital, and decided to really break the convention by breaking the form of it. I wanted to, instead of just use it to show off different types of repertoire, I wanted there to be a frame or a story. And I made it an open-ended process for people to contemplate their problems and think about how to deal with them. And I used the structure of the Catholic Mass as a way to get into that, but in a non-denominational way. So you can come to it as you are. So we had some of those movements tonight, Kyrie, Gloria, Sanctus, and so on. And I paired with each Latin piece of the Mass a open-ended question. So for instance, the original question was, Kyrie, what are you worried about? And this iteration, in collaboration with Deshaun and his practice, we came to Kyrie, meaning have mercy. You know, Lord have mercy is essentially what the Kyrie is about. And with the question, are you restless? You know, where is your restlessness? So a similar idea, but a little evolved to speak to maybe what people might be feeling today. That's gone through a lot of different iterations. So it's a framework saying, you know, what is the problem? Where do you feel it? How do you deal with it? Have you let yourself even think about it? And you can put different music inside of it. So for the Carnegie Hall version, there was some Handel and Bach, but also some Negro spirituals and also some new works written by Black composers. Deshaun can speak a little bit more to the composers that are represented tonight. And I also, maybe you can talk about the various tenets of music healing that kind of got us to the versions of the questions.
Yeah. Hi again, my name is Deshaun Gordon-King, and part of my practice is something that I call the sound ritual. So I am a certified sound healer, in addition to playing the flute, in addition to being a professor of music as a healing art, so lots of hats. And so what the sound ritual does, it takes the tenets of traditional sound medicine and therapeutic music, marries it with chamber music, jazz, and improvisation in order to create a curative listening experience. And with the open-endedness of the form of Mass, it was a really beautiful marriage between the sound ritual and Mass to come together in this way. And so when it came to the selection of the pieces, I wanted to always make sure that the pieces are telling a story. So the first question was, Are You Restless? And so the accompanying piece was Serenade to a Sun. And so that was written by one of my favorite composers, Bruce Stark, who honors a lot of indigenous culture. He honors a lot of Japanese culture in addition to Black American music, and he brings that into his writing. And so Serenade to a Son was actually a dedication to his child. And being a son and seeing my mother, I think there is nothing that makes a parent more restless than worrying about their child. And so from there, we go into a few questions down. We go into the piece that is called In Flow, which is an homage to indigenous flute music. And the entirety of the piece is called Ancient Presence. And if we are thinking about philosophies of spirituality, animism is one of my favorite, because what animism is a reminder that the spirit of God, universal intelligence, or source, whatever you would like to call it, is present in every single thing that's around us, whether that thing is inanimate or whether it is animate. And it is a reminder that that ancient presence is a part of all of us. And then the final piece that I curated on the program was Summerland by William Grant Still, who was known to be the African-American dean of composers. And Summerland is his auditory vision of what heaven is. And so I thought those three pieces, in addition to the questions, really speak to the journey of restlessness and coming to a place of refuge. And then it was a perfect launching point to ask all of us, what does it mean to be a refuge or a safe place for someone else? And so that is how I approach my practice, to make sure that I'm telling a story, but I'm also leaving audiences and myself with a charge to actually go out into the world and make it a better place.
Just a question for John. I would love for John to talk a little bit about Fly Away, which was the first piece that I sang on that wasn't a chant piece. Yeah, it's a really unique combination of things. It's the spiritual I'll Fly Away interpreted, and then another piece. And John, you might want to talk about what those are and how they came together.
So the story about how we came up with this, we were recording an album, and we were on break, and I was, practicing for a recital, and one of the pieces that I had to play was the piece called Fly Away. Well, the piano piece is called Le Gibet, from Gaspard de la Nuit by Ravel. It's based off of a poem about a man who was lynched in a field behind a bell tower. So anyways, I was practicing this, and Davóne and crew just started singing and playing, and it really got on my nerves. But then the sound engineer, Al, he hit the record button, and then we listened back to it, and I was like, okay, this is actually kind of cool. So the spiritual is, about, wanting to die, superimposed on top of a man hanging in a gallows behind a field, or behind a bell tower in a field, which is why, I don't know if you remember this, but there was this consistent B-flat ostinato that's supposed to be the bell tower, combined with just the eeriness of everything, matched with the question, which was, I remember the question. I think that was, where is it coming from? All of that together makes it a very heavy thing to listen to, but it makes sense because there's a catharsis afterwards. So you have a really low low, which is the lowest low of the program. Yeah.
Thank you, John.
And I noticed just broadening out to talking about the audience and the way we have experienced it here tonight, I wonder if you could just say a little bit about how you kind of created this sense of resonance with the audience. We had talked about sound frequencies, about liturgical elements, even moving through the space, even the way you have constructed the space here. I just wondered, sort of, how do you go about really bringing the audience into the kind of the spiritual resonance of what you're trying to do?
Yes. Even though things may be very simple here and in the program and how things are set, there's a lot of intention and a lot of thought over time in order to achieve something that we hope is impactful. It all starts with, one, getting to know one another and our kind of ideas and practices. I mean, Tyler and I are new to each other over the past few months. We've worked together in different capacities, but not in this exact setting. But also thinking about coming to Charleston and what that is. I've started to build a bit of a relationship with Charleston over the past 2 years. I got to know the incredible parishioners and people that lead Mother Emanuel Church as part of making a short film that honors that church. And it's now a film that's showing in Los Angeles at the Museum of Contemporary Art. But that was about a year-plus long conversation of trying to get to know this context, because we never want to just arrive somewhere and just assume that what we're doing connects. There has to be some actual relationship building. So building off of those relationships, knowing about this place a little and having felt it, being intentional about where and how we're doing this. So we had a virtual site visit where they showed us here this room through video and through pictures. We had a floor plan, and we knew what was available. These chairs that are normally here, there's a beautiful piano in the room, a gorgeous instrument. And it was a thought of, how do we make every single person here feel like their presence here has been prepared for? So it's very important that there's a protocol, that there's only enough chairs available as there are people in the room. There's a bit of decided stage management of, hopefully filling from the back, and if people weren't filling certain chairs, to remove them so you feel like everything that is here is supposed to be. The candles, so that the light seems to emanate from the individuals, and even into the musical aspect. So all of the composers that were performed, or all of the main pieces of music, are Black Americans or Native Americans, even though they span a lot of different genres, in different directions. And then even the intentionality with how you entered and what John was playing. We had an ongoing discussion today about what that improvisation should be with respect to who you are and where we are. So a tenet that I learned from Deshaun this week in our devising this is, and that's taught in this course, is meeting people where they are. Trying to have some idea, looking at someone and being present with how you might be. And it was surprising to me that you shared, it's if you're playing the flute, or maybe you can describe the example.
Yeah. So meeting people where they are, the example that I used, because a lot of the time you will see therapeutic music being used in hospitals in one-on-one settings. And the most prominent example of that is when you go into the ICU and you see someone who's hooked up to all of these machines, everything is beeping, the heart rate is extremely high. So you would go in and you would think, oh, I should play some immediately calming music. But that actually is not meeting the patient where they are. What you want to do is play something that has a little bit more agitation. So then you are connecting to their pulse. And then once you feel that you have really connected to their pulse, then you can begin to bring them back to you. And what that does is it helps to lower cortisol, pushes dopamine so that it is lowering their heart rate. So then they are going to be in a more stable place for operation if they need to do that, or if they need to rest, they're able to do that. And with that lowering of the heart rate, a lot of the pain that they may be experiencing is then mitigated. And so meeting people where they are for a general concert, we had to think about, okay, what is the vibe of Charleston? And so we were thinking 120, 100, thinking about beats per minute. And we were saying, no, 120 is more like New York, because that is a very active city. People are always walking. It's high stress, high energy all the time. And so Charleston, it's a little bit more calm and laid back. So we decided to go with a slower tempo for the initial improvisation, so that as you're coming in, it just feels like, oh, okay, I'm coming into something nice. And then we're able to slow that down until we end it to begin the offering. Well, to continue the offering, because the offering began the moment you came into the room. So, yeah.
Yeah, it was just a really fascinating discussion to think. Musicians think in beats per minute, or if you have heard of a metronome, the number that the metronome is doing is how many beats are happening in a minute. And John's initial idea was, well, New York is about 120 beats per minute. Generally, if you think about the population and the flow of things, and we thought Charleston is a much more relaxed place, so 100. So not completely relaxed, but still at a gentler place, and maybe your stresses and restlessness is a little more internal. It's a part of how the South feels in general. I grew up in Virginia, I know a little bit. But just trying to be respectful of the general demeanor of the people and how your inside and outside beat or tempo might exist.
That's fascinating. So we're kind of at a high point here, I think, everyone just having this amazing experience, and then we're sort of going back out into the world. And I guess you as performers are going back to regular life, perhaps, and then having more of these, experiences throughout your concert schedule. And I think many people are curious, just sort of how do these kind of experiences really affect the through thread of your life, and how do you really sort of maintain this kind of spark and inspiration sort of throughout your life? Or is it, for some people, it's quite a roller coaster going from one extreme to the other, but some people, we feel, just have a certain kind of balance. And I'm just wondering how this experience, for example, would resonate with you.
When I started performing a lot, it was pretty destabilizing. But now I'm on the other side, where I need to, every time I do a show, it can't really be the same. So this is the first time we did something like this. I mean, we did the sound ritual back in Art Yard, and it was 4 of us, or it was another person, but and this is the first time we did, we've done a lot of masses together, but every mass is completely different, with different program, different setup, different personnel, different lighting situation. We have smells and candles this time. You know what I mean? So, yeah, that's how I being able to do the same thing a bunch of different ways is what keeps me active and engaged and believing in the work, as opposed to just doing the same recital over and over and over again.
Yeah, each of the sound rituals that I have done have, again, been different because it's always evolving, because healing is something that is not linear. And so the sound ritual definitely takes on that form. But for me, every performance gives me something tangible that I can then take back to continue to develop the practice, but also it gives me practical experience that I can then share with my students to make sure that they are able to approach therapeutic music in a holistic way that's not just textbook, but it's full of real life experience. So.
Yes, and this kind of practice is just an extension of how I like to approach all of my work. I've been quite blessed to have a group of colleagues and friends that I worked with for a long time, over a decade, and we have similar ideas and we keep developing them. And one of them is just being respectful about where you are and who you're interacting with. And that translates to a lot of different contexts, whether it's here in a new place with new people, or even in the opera stage. Often in large arts institutions, there isn't an idea of who individuals are or how you honor individuals and their work and how they come together. And that goes all throughout the building, right? The people that you see on the stage, are we seeing them for who they are as people, or just how they are cogs in a machine? Definitely the people backstage and in the offices. How is their actual full lived reality a part of what's happening? I've learned from other generations that have had a different unique practice within institutions. One is the director, Peter Sellers, who's quite incredible in changing American opera by making it really about the individual. One simple thing he does is at the start of every rehearsal, he greets every single person. meaning he's worked in these opera houses for a while, so he knows the security guards over the years. He knows all of the stage and production staff. So imagine walking into a room, there's a chorus of 20 people, there's an orchestra of 10 people, a cast of 8, and so on, and greeting every single person, because every single person is unique and critical. No one is more important than another. We just do different things and have different gifts. And I've brought that into my own practice, especially when I'm in really complicated opera productions. For example, a few years ago, I sang X, A Life and Times of Malcolm X at the Detroit Opera. It's a really big piece. I'm playing a huge historical figure, and the cast is maybe 40 people, and the production team is larger. So learning from another generation that was about respect and unity, I always learn every single person's name as quickly as possible. There's usually sheets with people's pictures that the production makes, and study those in the first 2-3 days so that you can greet every single person and say goodbye to them. And what that does is it forces some sort of commonality. It forces some sort of connection and honesty so that when you're in the trenches of the actual working, there's some material to actually work with, because that production got hard. The music is hard. It's 3 hours long. And there were times when I felt weak or out of sorts. And the thing is, I could rely on the community that I had built. So hopefully the idea going forward, and even with our question of how are you a refuge for someone else, sometimes that's simply about your intentionality with how you look at someone. You don't have to do a lot, but just being present and honoring someone by actually engaging them. And just notice, hopefully leaving this room, how much you do that or don't do that, and how much other people do that. And this is in every context, not in the opera house. It's walking down the street. It's with the people you work with. It's with your family and loved ones. Intentional attention can breed so much. So thank you very much.
Well, I wanted to say, many people, when they think of an opera singer, they think of a certain kind of, I would just say, limitation or rigidity in that of a career, in that you have a certain voice type, you have a certain repertoire, maybe that is what you're potentially boxed into in a way. And I see with your work, it's about a bit opening up these kind of categories. And I just wonder if you could just say a little bit about this a kind of impetus to really open up your repertoire and really open up the potentials for what someone can do with a particular voice.
Yes, further to the idea of, even in an institutional or like the train of classical music, treating people like cogs in a machine, I just try to actually be all the parts of myself at once and not try to cut anything off. Because the interesting thing is it leads to better singing. It leads to better performing and performances and performers. If people are actually encouraged to think about the fullness of their identity and their own lived experiences, you can go to the whole theoretical, different sort of acting methods and things. You can prove it through actual practice. But if you simply allow someone to be self-reflective of themselves, then when they perform, you're going to enjoy it more because they're being honest, because the way that they are producing the sound comes from some sort of thoughtfulness. It really does have implication, and audiences, I think, really can feel when a performer is lying or is really cutting themselves off. So it really goes through all sorts of practice, and I've been blessed with a wide array of experiences, so you coming from the gospel church or singing in a lot of different formats, and it would be rude of me to say I can't be that part of myself right now, or I have to push that in a hole. I'm trying to be everything that I've been gifted with at once.
I'll just have one last question, and then we'll open it up to some questions from the audience. I noticed in the Mass, I guess the briefest section was the Credo, which was the most open-ended in a way, just stating, we believe, or this simple word about belief. I was wondering if you could just sort of fill that out a little bit. Maybe Deshaun, if you could just comment briefly just in terms of what is the role of belief, both personally and as an artist, as a creator. How do you kind of navigate that word, maybe?
Thank you. For me, belief is the foundation, because I don't think you can create if you don't have a sense of belief, whether that is in yourself, whether that is in a higher power, or whether it is in a teacher or a friend or a colleague. I think that when it came to this particular program, and we had Credo represent sort of the middle, that open-endedness was very intentional, because then the following piece was in flow, which is about that ancient presence. So for me, that represented the belief that we are all connected and that we are all experiencing this human life. And in that sense, it means that we are all responsible for our neighbors, we're responsible for our actions, we're responsible for intentionally moving in a way that makes this place better. And if I don't have the belief that a better world is possible, then I have no business creating the art that I'm creating. And so for me, belief is foundation. And that is why Credo was left so open-ended.
Oh, and just a little note about that. So Credo, in the Mass, the Latin Mass, the Credo is the longest text. It just goes on and on and on and on. And Carolyn Shaw, who's a really amazing young woman from Appalachia, also the youngest composer to ever win a Pulitzer, I asked her to write these set of songs for this recital at Carnegie. And when she set the Credo or sent it to me, I was like, is it missing? Is there any other part? Because it's a lot. But she said, no, I'm distilling it right down to the thing. And it's just imploring that people believe. And also the open-endedness goes to allow people to fill that with whatever they want. People believe or find their joy or find their higher power in a lot of different things. So I'm not going to tell you what to believe, but I'm going to pose the question, and you can decide from yourself what grounds you that way.
And I think the kind of harmony and intimacy and connectivity that the performance created, I do think creates a kind of nest for that word belief, and that it sort of sets us on a certain path. So I think that's part of the beauty of this performance, is that we're invited in this open-ended way to really go deep in terms of our own sense of self and beyond the self, but in this kind of really a nest-like nurturing environment that I think hopefully will have some positive outcomes for people. So yeah, so we don't want to, we have time for a couple of questions if anyone would like to pose something. I don't know how long the mic, you can shout more, okay.
I think this is perhaps for Deshaun. We've talked a lot about healing, and I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the physical aspect of healing music and that experience in terms of the vibrations that the musicians are making and the effect that they're having, and even in particular to this piece.
Yes. Thank you for that question. So there was a Japanese experiment in cymatics where it observed what happened to water when you spoke to it. And when you spoke to it with hatred, the water created these very fragmented and dissonant patterns. And when you spoke to it with love, they came together in beautiful patterns. And that science is called cymatics. And so that is something that is transferable to performances for people. Because you can think about all of the experiences that you have when it comes to a movie. If you go and see a horror movie, you're getting all of these anxious sounds happening in the soundtrack. And so you're on edge, you feel uncomfortable, and you're not at ease. But if you're watching a romantic film, you're having all of these beautiful swelling moments that let you feel that emotion of love and of peace. And so similar to this, our bodies are made of water, and that is exactly why that we're feeling that way. And when it comes to the pieces that are selected and the way that we've curated things, we wanted to have you explore all of these different emotions when it comes to restlessness. There was nothing that was extraordinarily dissonant except for Fly Away, which was intentional to make you think about where you're feeling that restlessness in your body. But even with the first piece, Serenade to a Sun, it was primarily consonant, but it was strange. It was very weird because it's like, where is this piece going? The meters are constantly changing. The harmonies are consistently changing and shifting. But at the end, you had this moment of peace and relaxation. And when it comes to applying therapeutic music and healing music in a more clinical setting, what we have seen is the body relaxes, the breaths deepen. You can actively see someone who may have been squinting because they were feeling pain. You see their face relax. And I do work with Shelter Music Boston, and we go to about 6 different shelters in the Boston area, and we perform for the residents that are there. The shelters have been wet shelters where people are still actively using, but they're able to find a bed. We've done women's shelters, we've done homeless shelters, and we always have a survey. And one of the most common threads that we receive in these surveys is, before this concert, I was in pain. Before this concert, I did not have a sense of purpose. And then after the concert, I'm no longer feeling pain. I'm feeling connected. I feel like life has a meaning. And so that is the power of the healing aspect of music. So yeah, I hope that answered your question. Thank you.
Okay, Mina.
I also have a question about good vibrations. So I don't know, I might have been hearing this, I don't know if we were actually doing it, Davóne, but was it the On You Stay where you changed sort of your embouchure and got overtones purposefully? You were doing that on purpose, right? Why did you choose to do the overtones in the On You Stay? And what was specific about doing that?
Yeah, there's some intention and there's some just, taking the inspiration in the moment. But what's the best way to get into it without giving you a whole lecture? Yeah? No, so part of this is this Gregorian chant idea, this kind of straight tone, and it's big and it's mystical in a certain way. There's another thing of, just allowing vibration to come through you and allow that to have the fullest form that it takes. So if I'm singing that tone as purely as possible, which is kind of the gift that Gregorian practice gives us, singing tones very purely, so it makes you sing in a very healthy way, right? There's full support. The airflow is constant but has a little spin or waver in it. That's how gospel singers get runs. If you, like that, it's all related in that way. But, so it's a healthy sound. It has overtones, which means it's very pure and it's in tune. And I also think in a lot of my practice lately, I keep reflecting on Leontine Price, the incredible black soprano who's our greatest soprano so far. She always said, I strive to be a clear glass, meaning she treated herself with respect, was very rested, had incredible continuing technique so that she could allow whatever was going to happen to flow through her. And that meant on the operatic stage or maybe even in life. And so trying to hold that kind of grounded, full tone is allowing something to flow through me that I'm not controlling. So overtones are able to happen because there's not an over-management of the sound.
Okay, maybe one more. We got. Okay, one more question.
So I'm a visual person, so the thing that struck me when I walked in was the staging of the room. And you talked about different aspects, the candle, the sensory things. But what I was curious about was the spacing of the chairs. Besides the fact that you didn't want us to talk to each other, what? So can you talk a little bit about the spacing?
Yeah, well, one part is wanting to just use and fill up the space. And also with the spacing, I wanted everybody to just have their own private experience. You know, energies really, really do travel. Sometimes when you're caught up in an audience, there's a lot of things happening that maybe you're not aware of, or even just the physical disturbance of being next to somebody. But I love chairs. I mean, I've done this in a lot of different places. We've done recitals in, Chicago and different places. We spread things out so people can have their own grounded personal experience, and you can take up your own space as you wish and allow what happens to happen there.
I feel like I was this big.
Yes! Yes!
All right, well, I'd like to thank our performers again for this amazing evening. Thank you all.